Yeah, so here's the thing. All of these here, this is all my attachment theory stuff. I basically went through today and tried to think of a way that I was going to talk about this so that it would be accessible to all you guys. And I think I've come up with a pretty good overview and a way of talking about this. So here's my goal today. I'm gonna get rolling on this. So here's my goal today. I want to introduce you guys to the way in which attachment theory grows in childhood, how it's created in some ways, and then how that attachment style ends up manifesting itself in adult relationships. I'm going to give a few, like a bit of an overview on not how you guys can all like diagnose your own attachment style. Like, this is not a lecture that is designed for you to like do a bunch of self-work and try and understand your attachment style better. So just please know that. This is designed more to give you an overview of how this works. Now, if you're watching this and you're thinking to yourself like, holy crap, that's me. Cool. Like if you find that to be helpful, that's great. But I'm not trying to like peer into the soul of any one person who's watching this right now and analyze anybody on it. All right. So attachment. Attachment theory is a theory that is all about how we relate to others, form connections, and form a sense of emotional, physical in some ways, but emotional stability, safety, consistency in our relationships. Attachment is something that starts in childhood almost immediately after you're born and is something that carries through your entire life. It is not something, a common misconception that people have about attachment theory that I want to clear up even at the beginning here, is that you are not locked into your attachment style. So when you're born, if there's, if there's an attachment style that you develop as the result of the way that your caregivers meet or don't meet your needs, and let's say you develop some of the manifestations of dismissive attachment, it does not mean that you are doomed to dismissive attachment throughout your entire life. Okay, you can develop secure attachment later on in life if you work on it and if you surround yourself with the right people. All right, so it is possible. But what we're going to talk about in this today is I am going to start by talking about how it develops in childhood, why it develops the way it does in childhood, because this rarely gets talked about, and I actually think it's one of the most important pieces. So if you're a parent who's watching this, you're going to really want to pay attention to that part and kind of what it means later on. And we're going to really dive into that. So to start, we're going to think about childhood for a second, okay? So every single one of us we go through this process when we're born. So here's you as a little baby, okay? You're fresh, you're here, you're a little baby. You have, in most instances, but not always, okay? Generally, you have your caregivers who are going to remain gender neutral here. Generally, there might be two, there might be one if you are raised in like a single parent household. I'm going to try not to use the word parent. I'm going to use the word caregiver and guardian, because this doesn't just have to be like your biological parents. These can be the people basically who raise you. They're the ones who meet your various needs for survival, et cetera, et cetera. So this could be grandparents. This could be aunts and uncles. This could be whomever it is. So in your own life, if you're thinking about this, think about who are the people that were really around you as adults that helped get your needs met in some form or another while you were growing up. All right. So we have you. We have caregivers. All right. when we're born, well, really just in general, we have to think about humans as being animals, okay? Where really we all have a very guttural instinct to survive, right? As soon as you come out of the womb, you as a baby need to survive the harshness of the world, but you have a very limited ability to navigate it on your own. Humans are among the most helpless animals when they are born. Like, there are some animals that when they're born, they can survive, they can go get food, their parents abandon them immediately, and they're fine. Humans are not that way. In fact, humans are worthless when they come out. A baby, if you leave an infant baby to survive, it won't. It won't figure out how to eat. It's not gonna. It's just gonna die. Okay. In part, it's because our prefrontal cortex takes forever to develop because it's so advanced. So it's just a product of it. So when you come out here, I mean this respect, and with all due respect, when you come out as a big dumb baby, you don't have the ability to get your needs met. So you, as a big dumb baby, need the assistance of these guys. They are going to meet your needs. Now, what are the needs that you have as an infant? The things that help an infant feel like it's going to survive are going to be things like food, shelter, being cleaned, water, stuff like that, right? Very basic needs. Because you as a baby are not able to meet those needs, you develop a form of reliance on your caregivers in order to meet those needs for you, all right? So, obviously, for those of you that have been around babies, you know that if a baby is hungry, what is the baby going to do? We're going to start real easy. We'll have some softballs at you. What's a baby going to do when it needs to eat? I'm going to make this interactive. If you weren't ready for this to be interactive, it's going to be interactive. You cry. That's right. You cry. The baby's cry is designed to be one of the most obnoxious human sounds we can hear. The brain is actually wired to hear a baby's cry as so awful you want it to stop. And it actually forces adults to try to do what they can to make the baby stop crying. And so they'll do everything. They'll try to figure out, do I have to feed you? Do I have to change your diaper? Like, what do we got to do here to make you stop crying? Because that's the baby's only way of indicating that it needs help. All right, so we are going to erase this real quick. And I'm going to show you a sequence of events here of how attachment basically starts to develop. I'm kind of laying the groundwork here, all right? So I'm not using any attachment buzzwords yet because we're not quite into attachment yet. We're just kind of laying the foundation. So what we have here is we have you, the baby, who has a need. Okay, whether it's food or water or whatever it is. What the baby does is it indicates that need by crying. Okay? Basically, this goes to the caregiver. So this would be your parents, your guardian, whomever it is that is designed to take care of you and make that need be met. This baby has a baby's level understanding of what that means. Meaning that the baby doesn't give a shit if your parent is like generally available. The baby also does not have object permanence, so it's not sitting there in a crib thinking, "Oh, mom's just on the other side of the wall." As far as that baby's concerned, mom's gone. Mom is off in the ether somewhere because I can't see and smell you. All right? So all the baby cares about is, I've got a need, I need that need to be met. So they signal to the caregiver. What then happens is we get a caregiver who basically either does one of two things. The caregiver either meets that need, okay, or the caregiver does not meet that need. So if the sequence of food is baby's hungry, baby needs food, baby cries, basically saying, I need food, the caregiver is then presented with a choice. Do I meet this child's need by basically giving the food, or do I do something else? Okay. What happens here is if the caregiver meets the need, what ends up happening is it establishes a connection between the caregiver and child, which is the start of forming an attachment. Attachment in childhood is not about love. Okay? It's a common misconception. Sometimes people think like, oh, like I'm forming a secure attachment with my child by loving it. No, you're not. You are actually only building an attachment with your child if you are meeting its needs on a consistent, reliable basis. So are you attempting to, calm the baby, help the baby be more comfortable, feed the baby, making sure that, again, at the end of the day, the baby survives? What the baby learns here by having the needs met consistently and reliably is that this person here is reliable. And this person ensures my survival. And no, my handwriting is awful. I'm sorry. Bear with me. Okay? Basically, this says you are reliable to me. So what this does is it creates this feedback loop where the baby realizes I have a need. I will indicate that need to this person, and this person will meet this need, and it becomes a nice circle. All right? The baby is learning over time through a patterned response. I can rely on you for survival. And that you're going to meet my need relatively consistently and reliably. It does not have to be instantaneous. It could be like, I'm crying a little bit here, but I mean, I basically know at the end of the day that this person's going to get my needs met. Very early on in infancy, the child doesn't actually discern that it's the parent that's meeting the needs. It just knows that its needs are being met, which is why like babies can be handed off to other people and they don't really freak out. It's only when the baby starts to differentiate humans in its head of like, wait a second, you are familiar to me. You are not. I don't like this because I don't know if you're going to actually be able to help meet my needs, but I know you can, so I'm going to go over here. That's when that kind of starts to happen. But an infant child is not going to really differentiate at all. So the parenting advice to let your baby cry it out is, bad to do, because an infant does not have an adult understanding of that process. A lot of parents who let their kid just cry it out think what they're doing is they're teaching the kid to become a little bit more self-reliant and like, your needs aren't always going to be met or whatever. But that baby is basically making a connection here, which is basically this person does not meet my need. And I all of a sudden am left to my own devices to figure out how to get my needs met because this caregiver is not reliable. This is where we start to have attachment issues that happen. So to reiterate here for a second, and just to kind of make this clear, secure attachment in infancy means we have need expressed, met, and it's reliable and consistent. If you are a parent, the most important thing you can do for a young child is respond to them reliably and consistently. So when this happens, oftentimes this means secure attachment. Okay, so the way that this will manifest itself as the child grows is they will develop this sense that the caregiver is what's called an attachment figure. Meaning, I now have consistently enough had my needs met by this person. We're going to stick with the yellow here. This person or people equal my attachment figure. And what this means is that I now realize that these people or this person is going to meet my needs when I have them, for the most part. Not perfectly, but consistently and reliably enough that I can internalize a sense of safety. Because again, this is about survival and it's about safety. So I feel safe when I think about these people. So obviously, as an infant, you're going to be drawn toward these people. And the way that you can tell who an attachment figure is, by the way, both in childhood and in adulthood, is if you become distressed, it's who do you seek proximity to? And what this means, attachment figures. Sorry, I know this is like brutal. I'm working on how hard I push down. Okay, so who do you seek proximity to in times of distress? So we have baby who experiences distress. Baby's going to go here. I'm going to turn to my attachment figures here. Okay. Because that's who I know I can rely on. I am distressed. So if I'm crying, if I'm hurt, right? So think about it as like if I physically hurt, if I run into a wall, and some of you have probably witnessed this. If I run into a wall and I hit my head, or I fall on the ground and I scrape my knee, oftentimes if you watch a child, one of the very first things that child's going to do before they even react to the pain, before they have any reaction, they're going to look at their parent first. And they're going to look for their response. They look to see not only if anybody saw it, but they look to see it's even less about who's watching. It's more about how does this person respond. So if you're a parent who watches your child fall down on the sidewalk and scrape their knee, and you freak out, your child is going to freak out. The child will panic because their caregiver is panicking. Okay. All of a sudden, I'm hurt, but I also you're not meeting my needs. You're freaking out. Again, it's about needs, right? Like we want comfort, we want safety, we want emotional support. So if I've just hit my head on a wall and I feel the pain and I look to my attachment figure and you're freaking out, now, first of all, I'm going to freak out because I think I need to if you're my attachment figure. But now all of a sudden, you're not really meeting my needs. You're panicking on your own right? Not great. But in childhood, that's usually what you'll see. It's who do you look to? Who do you seek physical proximity to when you are hurt? It's the kid who comes and walks toward their parent with their arms open, or they're having a hard time. They're like, I want my mommy, like that kind of thing. That is oftentimes a product of secure attachment because of that internalized secureness. Okay. So that's generally how you can tell who an attachment figure is. In adulthood, it's the same way. We're going to get to adulthood a little bit later on, but adulthood, it's if you're having a hard time, you're having a bad day, you're really struggling, who do you seek proximity to in those moments? And sometimes it's ourselves. Sometimes it's parents. Sometimes it's for me, it's my wife. Sometimes it's our friends, right? But it's the people who over time have shown to be consistent and reliable. I'm going to keep repeating consistent and reliable because it's really the most operative part here. Attachment doesn't happen because of what the baby does. Attachment happens because of what the attachment figures do. So if there's only so much you can do as a person to facilitate the attachment. It's really about the response that you get. All right. So again, you have to think about it as a reinforcement mechanism. If I'm distressed, I go to my attachment figures. they meet my needs, it reinforces for me that these are people who are reliable to me, thus I'm going to continue to rely upon them. The long range effect of this is the child starts to learn over time that people are reliable. As they start to have an understanding of kind of the wider range of humans that are available to them, they build this sense of like, if I'm hurt in some way, people are there for me. And I will generally be able to get my needs met in some way. And that my needs matter in childhood. And then in adulthood, secure attachment is my needs matter, and so do the needs of other people. So what happens, again, to kind of go back here with the secure attachment thing, is because the child forms this bond, sometimes what they start to think is like, my parents need to be here in order to meet my needs. And there's inevitably going to be a time in the child's life where the child is going to need to be on their own, right? And one of the hallmarks of being able to identify secure attachment in childhood is if you remove the child from their caregivers, the child will cry. The child will become distressed. And people who don't know how attachment theory works have this tendency to think that if a child cries when you remove it from its parent, that's a bad thing. It's not. In fact, it's a manifestation of the attachment, because what you're doing is you're saying, hey, here's your secure base. I'm going to go ahead and take it away from you. So a child in an unfamiliar environment who all of a sudden doesn't have their parents available to them is going to have a bit of like a, oh my God, like, wait a second, where are you going? I need you here. And that's totally healthy. I'll give you an example from my own personal life, because I always like to give this in my classes when I talk about this. When I was a child, I remember very distinctly, there was this summer where my parents were both of my parents worked, and my grandmother used to be the one who took care of us during the day when my parents were working. But there was a time where my grandmother couldn't do it, and my parents really wanted to diversify and get us involved in a few things. I was still very young. I was probably like maybe 4 or 5, maybe even younger than that. And they took us to the local YMCA, and the local YMCA had like a daytime program where you could like play basketball, and they had games and all these things. And I still remember vividly to this day, like the first day of it, when my parents dropped me off and they went to leave, freaking out, like just so like sad and crying. And it hurt. It was like gut wrenching that my parents needed to leave. And they still left because they needed to. But then what you see in secure attachment with a child is after their parents leave and after they move over the distress of the fact that their parents left, they will start to explore their environment. They'll kind of calm down and they'll be like, okay, it's cool. I've internalized enough that my parents exist. I'm going to go explore the environment and I'll be okay. Also, if the parents are there in the strange environment, what you'll see oftentimes is the child will kind of explore. They're sort of like an astronaut. Tethered to the International Space Station, right? So the International Space Station is your parents, and then they'll float out and they'll go explore, but they have that lifeline there, right? And they're always going to kind of look back at the window and they're going to say, hi, do you see this? Mom, do you see this? Check this out. Look at this, right? But they're exploring their environment because they feel safe to, because they've internalized this sense of like, if things go wrong, if I get distressed, I'll be okay. So that's why when the parent leaves, you're kind of like, whoa, what am I tethered to? But then they kind of recalibrate. They notice that other adults are pretty reliable and they're good. That's a little bit about how secure attachment works. We're going to get to how it goes into adulthood, but this is something that happens when your caregivers are consistent, they're reliable, and you basically, for the most part, can tell that your needs are going to be met, because then you say like, okay, cool. If I cry, my emotional experience is allowed to be in the room. If I cry and I'm sad, my parents will, they'll calm me down. They'll be cool. They'll listen. They won't freak out. They'll help me get my needs met. And it's a very powerful thing for a child to experience that. So if you're a parent and you're watching this, please know that your consistency and reliability in response is good. As children get a little bit older, you can let them be uncomfortable for a little bit, because they do have to learn how to navigate discomfort. But the important thing is that they have to know that at the end of the day, they've got some support system if things really go off the rails. So it's one of those things where, like, if the kid falls Or, the kid's having an argument with a friend, and you're like, oh man, like that's really hard. I'm here for you, but let's figure this out. I'm going to let you try and learn your way through this. You're trying to learn a skill. You're trying to do this thing, and it's frustrating. That's okay. But you're there emotionally. You're validating the frustration. That's all right. You get to be frustrated. Let's figure this out. It's so cool. You want to play this cool little like flute thingy. Let's figure it out. That kind of thing. But the child builds this internal sense that there's something reliable there. I make this point about children crying when they are separated from their caregivers because parents sometimes freak out about this. And as a parent, you need to know it's okay. You can leave your child in the hands of the people at the summer camp or wherever you are, and you will be okay. We're going to talk about the dark side of attachment. Not necessarily a dark side. It's just, it's not a dark side. Okay. I don't want to make it sound like if you don't have a secure attachment style that you are doomed and that you're some horrible person. You're not. It just means that you may have some extra stressors as it relates to getting your needs met. All right. So to reiterate our pattern here, right? Child has a need. Now they indicate it, and the need is not met. So let's say, for example, I'm 15 or I'm 18 months old. I have the ability to crawl. I'm kind of building the ability to speak, but I'm mostly going to be crying. I'm really hungry. Let's say over time, what happens is the kid indicates that they're hungry. Baby cries, toddler cries. And the caregiver does not seem responsive. Either they're neglecting, like intentionally not being available. They're just not available. Maybe they're not around. Maybe they don't respond to the crying. But at the end of the day, my belly doesn't get full. What the child then has to do is one of two things. Ugh. God, I'm so sorry about how horrible some of this writing is. The child has to do one of two things. The child will do one of two things. The first thing that the child may do is they will get louder and they will cling. So if all of a sudden my caregiver, I'm hungry, and your parent, your guardian, your attachment figure doesn't meet the need. Sometimes what children will do is they will get up in your face. They'll cling. Mom, mom, mom. They might cry. They might throw a temper tantrum, right? They might freak out. They'll do anything they can to try to close the gap, because what's happening is, again, if we have you over here, cannot believe I just drew an inadvertent penis on that thing, but whatever. And we have your caregivers. If as the child, if you are basically perceiving that there is distance here, that there's this big wall between you and your parents that's making it so that they're not meeting your needs. So what you're going to do is you're just going to try to be like all over them. And you're going to get louder. You're going to throw a temper tantrum. I want candy. No, like parent doesn't really respond, doesn't do anything. I'm going to throw a temper tantrum. I'm going to cry more. I'm going to cry really hard. And what the kid will do is they will try anything they can do to get the attention of their parents. And then what can happen in this is either the need is met or not met. All right. If the need gets met when the kid gets louder, what they learn is that this becomes a reinforcement mechanism for this. The child learns from a behavioral perspective that if I get louder when mom and dad, or when mom and mom, or whomever are not available to me, that they will then meet me. Then they learn I have to be really loud. I have to cling. I have to make myself known. Because if I don't make myself known, I will be forgotten about. And so what the child does in a very egocentric but developmentally appropriate way, the child internalizes that I'm not worthy of getting my needs met unless I'm loud. Are my parents' needs more important than mine? Do other people matter more than I do? Because when I make my needs known, nobody responds to me. I don't feel the safety. I don't feel full. So all of a sudden, I have to question, is it me? Is it that I'm not doing enough? Is it that somehow I have to be better? I have to do extra things in order to get my needs met by them. Now, this may be hitting close to home for some of you. And again, this is not me trying to diagnose an attachment style for any of you, but this may hit close to home. This is how anxious attachment develops, also called preoccupied attachment. What the child basically learns is that as long as I'm either loud and in your face, or conversely, if they have a parent who basically relies on them to meet their needs, then what they learn is if my parents' needs are met, if they're cool, then they'll take care of me. If mom and dad stop fighting, then they'll take care of me. If my mom knows I'm around and knows that I love her because she's having a bad day, then she'll make me dinner. Like if you have like a depressed parent, for example. So they learn I have to both A, take care of the person, like the person around me has to be taken care of, and B, that person's needs are more important than mine because mine come after. And if I don't make my needs known in a very like big way, then I'm never going to get my needs met. And what that also creates is a fear and an anxiety and a distress when there is distance. So those of you who have been waiting on me to get to the other end, if all of a sudden you have a need in childhood and you indicate that need and it's not met, maybe you try this and it doesn't, like maybe you try this over here and it doesn't work. Then what the child learns is I have to fend for myself. So I'm going to get my food. If I can't rely on you guys to take care of me and my needs, my emotional needs, if I fall and I scrape my knee and I know that you're not going to help me feel better, then fine, I'll do it myself. I'll make it work. I don't need you. I don't need you in order to get my needs met. In fact, it's quite disappointing to me in some ways that I keep trying to get my needs met by you and you just can't do it. And my needs are important and your needs aren't right now because I need to get mine met. Then that's what will happen. The child will kind of build this self-driven, and they'll actually start in some ways to form and attach a secure attachment with themselves, because if what happens, again, to kind of go a little bit here into the reinforcement mechanism, is if you fend for yourself and need is met, then this, again, reinforces this, right? So we're seeing reinforcement mechanisms here. All of a sudden, I now realize that like I'm reliable, but what it passively reinforces is that, I should put this in parentheses up here. What it passively reinforces is my caregivers and people close to me are unreliable. Not only am I reliable and can get my needs met, you can't. So honestly, at this point, I'm going to just meet my own needs. I'm not going to. So what you'll see is the child will stop approaching their parents. The child will stop crying. The child won't cry. They'll just be like, whatever, man. They will not show their distress because they've learned that if I do that, it doesn't matter. I'm not going to get my needs met if I do that. And over time, I've learned, hell, it's not even worth my damn time. I might as well just go get the cookies out of the jar myself because I'm not going to get any help. I might as well just talk myself down from my anxiety because guardian sure isn't available to do it. I only feel safe when I am in control. And if you're going to try to come at me with some kind of closeness, that's threatening to me because you're basically telling me like, oh, you want to be close, but that's not reliable enough. I have to rely on number one here. And this happens very early on, and it's kind of amazing to watch. Like I worked in a child development lab when I was at Purdue, and I worked with children who were 6 months to a year and a half old. And it was amazing to see how some children respond. Their attachment comes out even in those observations where you will see children who just will not indicate their needs to adults because they've learned like it's not worth your time. It's a pretty, I mean, it's kind of amazing because it reinforces itself. Now, you may have that like you have certain needs that are not met by being by yourself. And this is where both of these we're going to talk about kind of the outcome of those and what happens next here in a second. When no matter what we do, the needs aren't met. I'm going to throw the darkest one out first. I mean, when we're talking about childhood, if a kid has to eat and the kid's needs not being met and they can't get food, I mean, the child can eventually die, right? Like then we're talking about like severe neglect. Again, we have need, indicate, and then let's go not met no matter what the means. Or, well, actually, let me do this really quick. Because this is where we're going to get into a bit of a... This one gets a little bit tough here. So we're going to go over here for a second. When we have needs that are just straight up not met in childhood, generally this is going to have super adverse consequences. Where it's not reliable at all. Now, you can have death, you can have... in some ways, this is where like feral children can be brought in, or you're going to have basically where the child is going to outsource to attachment figures that are either parasocial relationships. If you're more in like adulthood, parasocial meaning like Twitch streamers, for examples, or like social media or whatever it may be, friends, peers, that kind of thing, where they're really just like, you know what, screw this. But they're more likely to go in the direction of like, okay, I'm just going to meet my own needs that way until I find people. But they're going to internalize it as, I found all these other people because I did it. So I really am still the only one I can rely on. So now I'm going to talk more about this one. When attachment figures who are relatively consistent and reliable also inflict pain on a child, or become grossly unreliable, but still have like tinges of reliability. But mostly when they inflict pain on the child, whether it be through abuse, physical and emotional, whether it be through neglect, this is where we have what's called disorganized or chaotic attachment. Basically, the way this works is that the child learns that this person meets my needs, which is good, okay, but also hurts me, which is bad. So when you're growing up and you have parents say who put food on the table, they make sure that you're not hungry. They make sure you have a roof over your head. They make sure you got water. But so like you kind of get these needs met and you learn like, hey, I can rely on these. I can rely on this person. Every once in a while, this person meets my emotional needs. Cool. I feel okay. I can kind of rely on this person. But then that person's also abusive. Let's say when you touch the stove that parent hit you, or a parent is really berating, or the parent is intentionally neglectful at various times and the child can't figure out why. What develops is this disorganized attachment where it's internal chaos of people who meet my needs can also hurt me, but they don't always hurt me, but they can, and that's scary. So now all of a sudden reliance on others, which has been useful insofar as it's helped you get some of your needs met, has come along with it these really awful consequences or these really strong conditions. And it makes it very difficult for a child to trust other people. They sort of like want to, but when you get close, it's too scary for me because that comes with hurt, that comes with harm, it comes with pain. A traumatic instance in childhood can have this effect on a person. I want to talk about this one just a little bit because this is an attachment that will manifest itself in adulthood, and people with this attachment style aren't doomed. But I will say, in all honesty, if this is an attachment that stands out to anybody here, it's going to take some work to move through. Not just for you, but for the people around you, because this is a really rough type of attachment to have. The other ones aren't particularly fun either. Dismissive has its own, or avoidant has its own drawbacks. We'll talk about these here in a second in adulthood. Same with anxious. But I do want to bring up this type because this is basically where my needs need to be met and I'm in pain. Now, this is also in some ways how children can develop and people can develop what's called pre-verbal trauma, which is basically if you are in infancy and you don't have language yet and you are, say, shaken, or you are, left to cry it out and experience the distress on your own without having any language to understand that. If a child is laying in its crib and it's hungry and it's crying because it's trying to get its needs met and those needs aren't being met and there's more and more pain despite the fact that the kid is crying out for help, an infant could experience that as a trauma. The brain could have a trauma response to that, but the child doesn't have verbs or language to be able to articulate that. So later on in life, there's this very unfelt or deeply felt but unarticulatable thing that happens of I keep having these various trauma responses to things and I don't really know why. Not that it's guaranteed to happen if you leave your kid to cry. Again, you guys, I really want to emphasize the point here. I really have to emphasize this point. This is stuff that has to be consistent, the good and the bad. This is not a one-shot thing. This isn't your kid was crying in the crib one night and you both slept through it and now the kid's damaged forever. It doesn't work that way. This is patterned responses. This is, are you consistent and reliable in the fact that you're meeting a kid's needs? Or are you consistent and reliable in the way that you are not meeting their needs? Are you unreliable and inconsistent over time? So please, I emphasize this for anybody I ever talk about this in therapy and in classes. Please get out of the idea that a one-shot nodal instance is going to ruin everything. Okay? It takes time. Conditioning takes patterns in order to build up this internal thing. I just really want to emphasize that point, you guys. This is called disorganized, sometimes called chaotic attachment. This is a tough one. It can be worked through, though. And I've watched and bared witness to it being worked through firsthand in therapy as a therapist. So just know you're not doomed if this is your attachment style, okay? All right, so we're going to move here into adult attachment. So what happens is, whatever it is that you internalize here as a child, you're going to carry into subsequent relationships. The thing that happens is, so you take what you've internalized, and then when you go to the next relationship, you are going to use this as a way to conceptualize this. You're going to transfer it into this attachment. One of the hallmarks of adult intimate relationships is the transfer of attachment. Okay? So you're going to carry these into adulthood and into the relationship that you end up fostering with this person. Okay? So here's a simplified way of thinking about it. Basically, what happens is adults get to a point where they start to conceptualize two things: their worth and the worth of others. Basically, my worthiness of love and connection, other people's worthiness of love and connection. This is kind of the oversimplified way that these things get internalized. So you heard me say this a little bit earlier on, right? Like, if you're learning that, like, other people's needs are more important than mine, they must be more worthy of love and attention than I am. Thus, I am not worthy of love and attention. So what we get here is this cool little chart. Now, again, this is like a general overview, okay? So it's missing some of the nuance that may be relevant to your own lives, which is why I have to do an assessment as a therapist. But this is a good way of thinking about this, okay? If you're a person who kind of walks around and basically can identify, I am worthy of love, okay? I am worthy of getting my needs met. My needs deserve to be met. My needs are important, and they matter. Okay? This is what I mean when I'm over here. So we're over here right now. Okay? I matter. Now, again, this may resonate with some of you as I'm saying this, okay? I matter. If you also simultaneously hold in that space of I matter, so do you. So do other people. My needs are important. Your needs are important. And those two things exist simultaneously. Meaning that there may be times where you can't meet my needs, and that's okay because I can handle it. I can meet them. There may be times where you can meet my needs, and that's great because then I don't have to do it. And there's times where I can meet your needs because your needs are important. And I might be able to put mine on hold for a second to take care of yours. Okay? Therefore, other people are worthy of love, of having their needs met, of adoration, etc. This fits secure attachment. Okay? Again, as a general overview here, I'm worthy of love. Other people are worthy of love. I can hold those things simultaneously. We all have needs. Sometimes mine won't be met. Sometimes yours won't be met. But we're generally going to have kind of a good faith effort to make sure that both of those are met. Cool. I'm also going to draw down here a chart or a line that I'm going to refer to of closeness and distance. Okay. Now bear with me here. I'm hoping this is going to make sense. But what securely attached people also hold is a healthy balance of understanding closeness and distance. That they generally are going to move kind of like back and forth. They're going to have a very like wide range of understanding that sometimes in relationships there's a need for closeness, sometimes there's distance. I'm autonomous, but I'm also in a relationship. I have needs, my others have needs. Like, we can fit those things and we can work them out. Okay? Now, if you are a person who, again, says, I'm worthy of love, my needs are important, my needs need to be met, but other people, you could also put the closeness in here, is also a good way to put it. Like, closeness, I'm worthy of closeness or whatever. Like, others are not worthy of, like, my closeness, or others are not reliable, or others are not, like, I'm reliable, others aren't reliable. I'm worthy, others aren't worthy. Like, you can interchange a lot of words here, right? But I think you get the idea, right? Self versus other. Other people are not reliable. thus are not worthy of me approaching them, but I sure am. This is where you're going to find what's called the dismissive attachment. The hallmark of this being, I'm going to rely on myself. Not because I don't care about you, but because I'm reliable. I've learned that others aren't reliable, and I am going to keep it that way. When this person experiences times of distress, this is a person who's going to turn inward. Okay? This person is going to experience anxiety when they get toward closeness. So if there is, say, in an intimate relationship in adulthood, you're with somebody who is, or friends or whoever, who are constantly trying to be close emotionally, or are trying to rely on you, but you perceive them as being unreliable. But there's this call for closeness. There's this tendency for people who have avoidant or dismissive attachment to experience anxiety here, and then to engage in behaviors that are going to pull them toward distance, because they are far more comfortable when people are at arm's length, because it allows me to rely on myself and it means I don't have to rely on you. Now, obviously, in healthy, intimate relationships in adulthood, there's a balance. Okay, like my needs and your needs matter, and like we do need closeness, we do need distance, but this person is going to be a hell of a lot more comfortable when there's distance in the relationship than they are when there's closeness. Which means that if they're working on the relationship, or the relationship's having issues with like emotional intimacy, this person is going to have to learn how to sit with some of the distress of experiencing the close parts of a relationship, where your partner says to you something like, hey, I would really like to spend some time with you today and just us. And because I'm having a bad day and I'm struggling or whatever, and this person's kind of like, or I'm having a bad day, but I'm going to shut down and I'm not going to talk about it, and I'm not going to go there because I can only rely on me, and I can't trust you to hold on to what's going on for me because I had such a bad day. So I'm going to shut it down, and I'm going to throw the walls up, and I'm going to create some distance here. Now, does this happen sometimes with secure attachment? Yes. But this is a patterned behavior. So this is going to be a person who's going to do this over and over and over and over again, because they experience the anxiety of closeness. Again, all spawning from this idea that you learned in childhood that I'm reliable, you aren't. It has been conditioned through my life that I can meet my own needs. Now, if you are a person that has basically learned, by the way you were responded to, I must not be worthy of getting my needs met. I can't reliably meet my own needs. I need others in order to do it. But people are important to me. I need to have it. I need to have that closeness. But maybe I'm not worthy of it. Maybe what I really need to do is make sure that other people have their needs met first. That I'm doing everything I can. That I'm being as selfless as possible in order to make sure that your needs are met, because then maybe you can meet mine. This is anxious, preoccupied attachment. Okay. A lot of times people who fall into this will say that they are being altruistic, that they put others before themselves. The dark side of this is that anxious, preoccupied people tend to be clingy. Where this falls on this is that these people will experience a significant uptick in anxiety when there is distance in a relationship. When there is a perceived, you're not here, or oh my God, are we okay? You're going to the grocery store by yourself? Are we okay? That's sort of a dramatized version of that, but this is something that I think goes on very much internally for people. So it's this anxiety you experience when there's perceived or real distance in the relationship. And what this person will do is they will generally overcompensate by trying to bring in closeness, because the idea is, and they'll do that through either trying to overly meet the needs of that person, by trying to hold that person in, by basically inserting themselves into basically any situation they can possibly insert themselves into, because they need to do it together, because if we're not together, then we're threatened. This is kind of the way in which anxious preoccupied attachment is going to show up in adulthood. Is it possible that at different times shift from one of these to another, to even another eventually? Sort of, Matt, but generally you're going to see kind of like a pattern until a person either has like adverse experiences that shift them into a different one, or until they kind of move into secure attachment. People don't really ping pong between attachment styles. That's not how it works. You are generally going to carry one of these consistently until you like work on it, or until you have reparative relationships. You can move to any of these, okay? This is why I say it's super important to realize you're not locked into an attachment style. It can be affected pretty strongly based on the relationships that you get into, all right? But what people tend to do is they tend to get into relationships that are familiar to them. If you've ever asked yourself the question, why do people end up dating people who are like their parents? It's because it's familiar. So here's the thing. A lot of people who are in the like dismissive or anxious realm will tell you that at various times in their relationships, it's not been good. They haven't liked it. For anxious people, they'll be like, God, I just get so freaked out every time that there's like, I'm afraid they're going to leave me again, because they're worthy of love. They're people, anybody could show you adoration. And because I'm not worthy of love, if somebody else shows you love, if somebody else does better than I do, you're going to leave me because you don't, I'm not worthy of you staying. This is where people will often say things like, I outkicked my coverage. This person's too good for me. I have to make sure that they know I'm good enough for them. These types of things. That's where this is really going to show up. And then but they're going to tell you generally in therapy, like, I hate that. I hate that about myself. It's distressing. It's hard. I know that we need to have time apart, but it's just this really deep guttural emotional experience I have when this happens. Dismissively attached people will often say things like, I have a really hard time forming close relationships with people. And that sucks. Like, I want to have close relationships with people, but they just kind of, everybody's so needy and clingy. But that really drives me crazy, because I know that at some point I want to be in a relationship with somebody. Like, I want to have people around me that I can rely on, but I just don't know that I can. And it's just, I don't know, people have stopped reaching out to me. They don't seem to want to hang out with me because they know I'm probably going to say no, or I'm just really not into it. And like, I'm just fine being by myself, but that sucks because I want a relationship. That's generally where you're going to hear a dismissive attached person come out. If you want to talk boundaries, anxiously attached people tend to set very what are called diffuse boundaries, where it's just, they're just mixing it all up with people. And they will generally try to hang on to a relationship longer than they should.
You've got style.
Whereas a dismissively attached person is going to set very rigid boundaries. They will tend to end the relationship maybe before they should. Yeah, you know what? I'm out. We fought one time. I'm done. I don't have time for this shit. I can't rely on you. I can't rely on you even in a freaking argument to listen to what I have to say. So I'm out. Now, I don't mean for these to sound like they're malicious, because they're not. This is just how they manifest themselves. It's an internal dialogue, again, that you create, that was created for you in some ways by the way you were responded to when you were growing up in terms of getting your needs met. All right. We have rigid boundaries over here. We have diffuse boundaries over here. With secure attachment, we have clear boundaries. Now, if you're interested in boundaries and how to set healthy boundaries, I encourage you to check out my YouTube channel, because I did one of these mental health topic lectures on healthy boundaries. And it's honestly, I think, probably the video I get the most feedback on, of people saying how like helpful it was to them and how much they learned from it. So I totally encourage you to check out that video if you're interested in how to set boundaries, because this is woven into that. So just so you know, that's out there for you. Door number 4, friends. If you're a person who has kind of learned over time that like it doesn't really seem like I'm worthy of love. I'm not particularly reliable. I don't generally meet my own needs very well. But you've also learned that other people aren't either. Or other people have harmed you, right? Or maybe you've harmed yourself. Okay, so maybe you engage in self-harm, or maybe other people have hurt you, or whatever it is. This is where we're going to find a lot of times disorganized attachment. All right. Where you're basically, it's hard because it's like, I can't trust myself and I can't trust other people, but I want to connect, but I don't know if I can. It's a really like, and so what happens and what makes this disorganized is these are people that will experience a significant amount of anxiety with closeness and may try to compensate to go to distance, but then we'll realize that distance is also really threatening. And so then they'll try to compromise to go back to closeness. And there's basically like anxiety experience no matter where they are until they find some marker somewhere along the line here that's comfortable for them. And then they will generally do whatever they can to keep into that spot. So what you'll see sometimes with this is, wow, we're way too close. And they will like sabotage the relationship in some way. They might do something that they regret, but it put distance. But then when they realize how threatening the distance is, they may overcompensate by trying to do something that pulls on way too much closeness. And it's a really brutal cycle. And it's hard to find comfort, again, because reliability is just not there. Distance means, if we have distance, it means my needs aren't going to get met. And I really need to get my needs met. If we have closeness, it means I might get hurt, right? So distance kind of has this comfort in the sense that like, you can't hurt me if we're distant. If I keep space between us, you can't harm me. If we're close, you can harm me. If we're close, I'm getting my needs met emotionally. I feel really good because I have this sense of closeness with a person, but you could hurt me. So there's this fear that underlines a lot of what's going on for them. And it's a very difficult space to be in. A lot of times what you will see is that disorganized attached people will sort of like find each other, in part because there is this like, I've used this phrase before in therapy when talking to people about this. There's like a kindred spirit feeling that happens with people with disorganized attachment, where you can kind of pin down who the other people are that have it. And there's this like, hey, you get it. We get it. That can be a really wonderful thing, because if both people recognize that as being the case, they will be willing to do some of the work in order to foster some of that closeness that they desire, and to not, and to experience a little bit of calm as opposed to an uptick in anxiety at either end of the closeness or distance spectrum. Or sometimes they will just have these really awesome friendships because they're like, you know what? I need to create a relationship here that's not too close, but not too distant. And we can just kind of be just right. They'll try to kind of hold themselves here as best as they possibly can. Like, I'm going to just kind of stick here. I don't want to go in either direction because they're both threatening. So how does this work in our relationships? One of the most common pairings is anxious and dismissive. What generally happens as a sequence here is there will be precipitating distress in the relationship. All right, so distress goes up. When this happens, the anxiously attached person is going to think to themselves, oh God, I need you. I need this other person to help me through this. And I've learned over time that the only way that that's going to happen is for me to pursue. So what this person's going to do is they're going to go and they're going to pursue. They are going to seek the comfort of the dismissive person. They're going to be loud about it. They're going to cling, or they're going to experience that anxiety of distress is going to equal distance. It's going to equal my needs not being met. I need them to be met. Please, please, please. Can I get you anything? They might overly apologize or whatever it might be. The dismissively attached person is going to distance. Because again, in response to the distress, this is how they've learned to deal with it. Correct, Titan. So this is how they've learned to deal with it. So I need to get away. I can't rely on you. I can only rely on me. Thus, I'm going to put some distance in between us right now so that I can figure my shit out and come back. Which wreaks havoc on the anxiously attached person. So what we see here is the increase in anxiety is going to happen instantaneously for both of these people. Okay? So now all of a sudden, anxiously attached person is anxious because they are perceiving more distance. Remember, when we have this little chart over here, all of a sudden in this sequence of closeness and distance, all of a sudden, anxiously attached person's over here, dismissively attached person's over here. All right? So now all of a sudden, dismissively attached person is trying to do everything they can to create distance in the relationship, and the anxiously attached person is doing everything they can to try to close the gap. And it just spirals out of control. Just absolutely spirals out of control. Because neither one of them is being able to have their needs met in the way that they need to meet them, in the way that they've learned to get their needs met. And usually what happens is the dismissively attached person says, I need space. You are smothering me. I need space to figure this out. Leave me alone. Now, it doesn't usually come out that directly. Usually what you're going to see is either ghosting, you're going to see some stonewalling, you're going to see some hard boundaries, you're going to see the person remove themselves physically from the situation where they may they may walk out, they may go for a drive, they may go to their friends, they may do whatever. All of this upticks the anxiety of the anxious person because the anxious person is basically saying like, oh my God, their needs are clearly more important than mine because they're taking care of themselves and they're doing whatever and they don't need me, which means they don't need me, which means, oh my God, maybe they could use somebody else. Maybe somebody else would be better for them. I need the reassurance that I'm good enough for you. Is there anything I can do? Please, please don't leave. Please don't leave. And they may resort to destructive means of trying to rope that person back in. At its worst, you may see a person threaten self-harm as a way to keep the person close to them. It's more, common and normal. You're going to have people who, might cry or like get really emotionally regulated. Like they'll basically blow up because they've learned if I blow up here, this is how I'm going to get your attention. That maybe, just maybe, if I scream loud enough, you're going to come back and you're going to help me out. But the dismissively attached person's like, nope, I ain't having none of that shit. None of it. You're clingy and you're obnoxious. And they may say, you know what? I'm just gonna leave. And you know what? Maybe we just call it. Like, this isn't worth my time. And so you can see, I think I've made my point. You can see how this just doesn't work very well. So what I have to do as a therapist when I'm working with this is I have to do as quickly as I possibly can. I have to disrupt this sequence over here. And what that usually means, again, you guys have to assume here when we're talking about this that we're talking about a relationship where the people have decided, I want this to be healthy. Like, I want this to be something that works. What we have to do is we have to get and this is the order of operations, guys. Okay? It's the order of operations. This is how it happens in a healthy way. And I know that when I say this, all my dismissive avoidance out there, you're going to look at me and go, just hang in there with me for a second, okay? We have to get the dismissively attached person to lean in. Because more often than not, the anxiously attached person is going to freak at the distance. Now, this does not mean that the dismissively attached person has to be smothering, but if the dismissively attached person leaves, as a therapist, even if they leave the room, there's not anything I can do. I can't help you have a reparative relationship if you're going to leave the room for me. So what we got to do is we got to help the dismissively attached person hang in there with the anxiety that it takes to turn in. And this person needs to move toward. Now, simultaneously, the anxiously attached person has to leave space for that person to come toward them. So this is actually hard for both of them because it means you, as the attached person, have to back off a little bit and allow space for the dismissively attached person to come in. Because what's going to happen when we do this is as soon as this person sees that, it's going to help. Okay? And what that's going to do is it's going to allow the anxiously attached person to relax a little bit. And then it's going to create an environment where the dismissively attached person can relax a little bit and can keep some of that distance that they want to create. This is the classic whenever you hear people talk about pursuit distance, you have to start with the distancer. The distancer has to lean in a little bit, has to fight through the distress of that so that the anxiously attached person can, or the pursuer doesn't have to close the gap. And when we do that and we help, because then we have to help the anxiously attached person build the distress of maybe this isn't going to feel as close as you want. But what we're going to then facilitate is we're going to have a conversation where there is distress, iMessages, right? Identification and stating of the need. Validation. And over time, we want this to be consistent and reliable. And what this will do is it's going to help form that reparative relationship where we're going to create a secure attachment in this specific relationship. Okay? So here's what happens. The dismissively attached person says, I need a bit of space right now. I'm frustrated and I'm feeling smothered. And I'm anxious right now about what's happening in our relationship. The anxiously attached person is going to have to swallow their worries that it must be because of them and has to validate the dismissively attached person's anxiety without personalizing it. By acknowledging it just as being anxiety. That's all it is. Okay. Will it have a effect on our relationship where you're going to bail? Not necessarily. And I have to realize that in order for you to stay and feel comfortable in this relationship, I have to give you space. Like, it's important, right? But I also can validate your needs and your anxiety and your emotional experience in a consistent and reliable way, which over time will help the dismissive person say, okay, wait a second. So when we have distress and we need to talk about something, you'll hear me out. And you'll also take care of yourself. You'll give me some space. I respect that. And then over time, it's like, hey, wait a minute. When we get in arguments, you do a pretty good job. Like, you'll hear me out and you'll validate. And that's really awesome. And I really appreciate that. And then as the distress happens, the person starts to say, hey, you're kind of reliable. I'm reliable too. Shit hits the fan. I know I can rely on myself. But I actually trust you. Okay. Conversely, the anxiously attached person in this instance by getting validation from the dismissively attached person is going to hear, I hear that you're anxious, right? It's okay that you're anxious. I'm here in some way to validate that for you, right? So the anxiously attached person is getting some level of validation, is getting some level of assurance, their emotional need being met by virtue of the person being present, right? But is also being acknowledged for the distance, saying thank you for the distance. So the anxiously attached person learns, hey, if I give a little bit of space to you, and I don't personalize this too much, you will attend to me. Okay? You will attend to me if I give you some space. I can trust you that if I have needs that are met, you aren't going to run away on me. And now that I can trust that, I'm going to state my needs a little bit more clearly because you are a little bit more reliable. And over time, it repairs that relationship to one where it looks like you have two securely attached people in this relationship. Right? Where now we can regulate closeness and distance effectively. Your distance doesn't scare me so much. Your closeness doesn't scare me so much. We can find the happy medium. Your needs matter, my needs matter. Again, to go back to that chart, right? Like your needs and my needs matter. The anxiously attached person has to get in touch with the fact that their own needs matter and that they're worthy. The dismissively attached person has to get in touch with other people's needs matter too. And other people can be reliable. Anxiously attached people will tell you, I'm reliable as hell. I will be there for people, right? You got to be reliable for yourself too. So the reason, again, to reiterate on this, the reason that this type of relationship ends up happening a lot is because people in either ends of this camp are used to it. The human brain loves consistency. It loves what it can anticipate. If you're an anxiously attached person, you're anxiously attached because that's something you learned from your childhood. You learned that because your caregivers didn't meet your needs. You're also used to it. You know what that means. You may have built an identity around it. You may have built a behavioral a whole library of behavioral manifestations of that. So you know what to expect. You get it. And you know how to operate. A lot of times anxiously attached people will struggle when the person they're with, no matter what that other person's attachment style is, will struggle when a person tells them they're worthy of love. That's the person that will say, if your partner says, hey, what do you want to eat for dinner? The anxiously avoidant person will the anxiously attached person will usually say like, oh, whatever you want. And they will struggle with the idea that maybe, just maybe, the person they're with actually cares about their needs. Okay? Coincidentally, this is where securely attached people will struggle with anxiously attached people because they will get frustrated with the person's seeming inability to take love. Like, you'd be like, hey, yeah, like, it's your turn. Let's go. Like, we'll go wherever you want to go. And the anxiously attached, like, no, because if I pick the wrong thing, then you might not love me anymore. Like, what if I pick the wrong restaurant? Okay? So, securely attached people will get annoyed by this. They'll like the closeness. They'll get their closeness needs met, but they're not going to get their distance needs met. This is why secure and secure is usually the best combo. Securely attached people have to be very patient if they end up coupling with people who are not securely attached. Okay. So that's kind of the way that is going to manifest itself. Whereas the dismissively attached person is likely going to struggle when they need to be relied upon in some way. When they recognize that like they actually have something to offer other people and that other people have something to offer them. They're going to struggle with that, not because they're assholes, but because that's an incredibly vulnerable state, because they learned at the same way that the anxiously attached person did, that their needs aren't going to be met. So it's very vulnerable, the idea that a person could meet your needs. A dismissively attached person is very likely, when you go for the dinner conversation, is going to pick. And they may not even give a shit what the other person wants. Okay? A securely attached person is going to struggle with a dismissively attached person because the distance needs are going to be met. But then when there's a call for closeness, and inevitably in the relationship, when something happens and the securely attached person needs to turn to the dismissively attached person for help and assistance, the dismissively attached person, upon that distress, is likely going to perceive that as clingy and is going to set some rigid boundaries. And a securely attached person is going to get annoyed by that and be like, you're not available to me when I need you. And I've learned in my life that people are available to me when I need them. So whatever the hell's going on for you, I don't really appreciate because I need you. Same to the anxiously, right? I've learned like space is good. I need space. I can't deal with you being on top of me all the time. So the securely attached person, in being comfortable in both spaces, also generally is going to set better boundaries about like, I need my space and my connection. And neither one of those has to be threatening. Now, I want to say I recognize and I'm very aware that I did not talk much about dismissive attachment or not dismissive, about disorganized attachment and how it works with this. Part of the reason I didn't do that is because it's quite unreliable. Disorganized attachment is going to really be something where distress is going to happen in the relationship and you can't really predict how the person's going to respond. And it's going to be jolting, because what that person really needs, like the ideal combination for a person with disorganized attachment, is to be somebody who is a very patient, securely attached person. They work really well together. And think about it, that should make sense, right? Like you have a securely attached person who can handle closeness and distance very adeptly because they understand the importance of both in a relationship. If you have a dismissively attached person, or I keep saying dismissive, a disorganized attached person who moves all around because they experience distress in various areas of that, being with a securely attached person is going to allow that person to adeptly move back and forth and be validating in that space and kind of help build some consistency and reliability no matter where that person is on the spectrum, which can help then calibrate that into a securely attached relationship. So I think the best combination is going to be with that. Where you're going to see disorganized attachment with like dismissive, for example, is if that person who has the disorganized attachment feels a significant amount of pain at closeness, they will probably couple with a dismissively attached person because then they can stay away from the closeness. Whereas with an anxiously attached person, if that's a person who, has sort of compensated for that by basically really desperately wanting that, like their needs to be met and attended to and constant, they're going to probably find an anxiously attached person who's going to be just fine meeting all of their needs and not allowing for any distance. They're kind of like a go where the wind goes until scaredness happens, until fear happens. And then the response that's going to happen there is going to be very unpredictable, predictably unpredictable. So no matter what configuration you want to put together here, the most important thing, like with when I was talking about parenting, is that you be consistent and reliable in response. Okay? Building attachment happens through response. It doesn't happen through initiation. It doesn't happen by being like, you don't build secure attachment. Like stating your needs is important, but stating your needs, if all of a sudden you say to somebody, hey, I'm really anxious and I really, can you come sit on the couch with me? And if that person squashes it and says, nah, I don't got time for that shit. That's what's going to fuel the attachment, not the way that the person initiated. So attachment happens through response. It happens through consistent, reliable, warm, validating, patient responses to people, where their emotional needs can begin to be reliably handled both by themselves and by the other. That is how we form secure attachment later on in adulthood. So you have to either find a relationship where that's possible. You have to also find a relationship where you can hang in there with the distress. Again, if you skew towards anxious, you got to build the distress tolerance for hanging in there with distance. If you are a dismissively attached person, you have to build distress tolerance for the anxiety associated with closeness. If you're disorganized, you're going to have to sort of build the distress tolerance with the help of other people in hanging in there with the fear response to the relationship where the fear response may not actually be necessary based on the mechanisms of the relationship. And if you're a securely attached person, you're basically having to build distress tolerance for when people try to pull you in directions that you're not really up for, and recognizing that, like, you don't have to set harsh boundaries. You also don't have to set diffuse boundaries. Like, you're just going to have to be patient with a person who's not securely attached in the boundaries and stuff that you create. But responses are how people form attachment, not initiations. Right? It's amazing the way this stuff works and goes through. This is why I love systems and relationships and all that kind of stuff, because there's so much of an explanation a lot of times for the way that people show up in their intimate relationships based on the relationships that they've had in the past. And this is what I mean by us carrying our attachment styles into future relationships. You have to think about it. So again, for anybody who's sitting in chat right now, if you're thinking like, how do I figure this out? You have to ask yourself, what is the pattern and the way that I respond in times of distress? First of all, where do I experience my distress? And second of all, how do I respond to it? So if you notice that you tend to get anxious when there is a call for closeness in your relationship, and you tend to compensate for that by trying to create distance, and you notice that that's a pattern over time, that you notice yourself doing that a lot. You don't like people who you perceive to be clingy. You generally don't find another person to be reliable. In times of distress, you're going to say, you know what? I don't think at the end of the day I can rely on this person to meet my needs, so I'm going to meet them myself. Then there's a good chance that you probably fall closer to the dismissive end of the spectrum. Conversely, if you notice that you experience a significant amount of anxiety when you perceive distance in the relationship, and you tend to overcompensate by being clingy, by creating various like things where people would consider them to be controlling, where you're constantly trying to get reassurance for your own self-worth by getting it from the other instead of giving it to yourself. If you notice in those times of distress, you think to yourself, I need the other person. I can't rely on myself. I have to rely on the other person to help me feel better. There's a good chance you may be skewing towards anxious. If you're a person who says, it kind of depends on the situation, and I feel pretty adept at either one, then you may fall into secure. If you're a person who says, like, I just get scared shitless at various times that I can't really figure out what the pattern is, you may be disorganized. I really hope that you found this to be helpful. I'm assuming you did, since so many of you came and hung out here. But I really, really, really appreciate that you guys were willing to come out and spend your time and believe in what I'm doing. And